Good morning, everybody, and very welcome to this webinar, Natural and Engineering Sciences, directed to all of you who are going to be reviewers in this year's review. And first of all, many thanks for taking on this commission. It's extremely important for us and for the researcher community in Sweden, the work that is ahead of you. And the reason we want to talk to you at this very point is that we want to reach out and give you some take-home messages to have in the back of your mind during this initial part of the review, your individual review. And I'm not going to go through all parts of the review process. I'm going to focus on your task now when you do your review at home, and then hint at what is going to happen later on in terms of sifting and panel meeting in August to September. But before embarking on this, let me say a few words about the Swedish Research Council, because many of you, statistically 60%, are not from a Swedish university. So VR, or the Swedish Research Council, is perhaps not so well known for you. And the reason I have sneaked in this abbreviation VR is that this is normally how we refer to the Swedish Research Council in Sweden, because it's called Vetenskapsrådet. At this slide, you will also see an email address, which you can use now, for instance, to send in questions regarding this webinar. And at the very end, I will try to answer the questions that you have. You can also use it later on if you want to reach the VR staff for further questions. So that's a possibility for you to use. But let's go to VR, or the Swedish Research Council. If you look at the Swedish system of funding, it is quite fragmented. So quite a number of different types of agencies and foundations that fund research. And not going too deep into that, I can just mention that the Swedish Research Council, or VR, is the largest one and has an annual budget of about 6.5 billion Swedish krona. So it's a substantial player in the system. So normally when you talk about VR, you think about fundamental research. And maybe a better denotation would be frontier research. We are interested to fund the type of research that brings the frontier of knowledge forward. And that is something for you to keep in the back of your mind when you review your proposals. Okay, so if we look at what we're supposed to do, well, we are supposed to do or support the research of highest quality. And in order to achieve that, we typically have very open calls, hard competition, success rates somewhere around 10 to 20% or so. So this is a fundamental tool in selecting high quality research. And as well, you are part of this in the peer review process because you're experts in your various fields, and therefore you play an essential role. I'm going to get back to the peer review process a bit more in just a short while. If we look at the Swedish Research Council, there are quite a number of different calls, but the major part is run in open calls that has an annual cycle, and you see the cycle here. And we are now in June, in the beginning of the review or the assessment part as well. If we look at VR in total, we get about 6,000 proposals per year. We have maybe 90 review panels and almost 900 reviewers at work during the year. So this is a major effect. If you wonder what the natural and engineering science is, how big part of it is about 1/3. I'm soon going to get back to that as well. And the main tool we have are various types of grant or grant types that are directed to individual researchers. So it's very much directed towards individuals. So if we look at the peer review process, well, what you're going to work with in your review this year are basically 3 flavors of individual project grants. You have the open project grant, and you have the same type of grant directed towards younger scientists called starting grants. And then you have one additional commission, and that's project grants with a directing or theme towards fundamental energy research. And that is a commission from the Swedish Energy Agency. They own the call, they make a relevance evaluation, and they send the proposals that they have selected to have the highest relevance to VR, that means to you, to make a scientific benchmarking. So the difference with respect to the open project grants is that you're expected to mark, but not rank. So that's a major difference, because when it comes to the normal types, project grants and starting grants, you're expected to both mark and then rank. And I'm soon going to get back to that part as well, because those two parts in your review are quite essential and they interplay. So let's have a look at the number of proposals this year, and actually this table is containing quite a number of numbers from 2011 till 2019. So 19 you find at the very right hand part of the table. You can notice that we have in total just over 1,700 proposals to handle of these three types. And if you look at the trend through the years, you can notice that we have been on a downhill slope the last couple of years, which has now leveled out. So we'll see what happens in the future. And the main reason for this downhill slope has been that we get a lower number of proposals from younger scientists to the starting grants. But also you notice that there is a significant step from 2016 when it comes to project grants from the Energy Agency. And that is not a lower number of total proposals, it's simply that the process has been changed, where the Energy Agency now makes a relevance evaluation first, and only the ones that survive that are being sent to VR for your review in the future. So this is the way it looks. So just under 2,000 proposals, and you belong to one of 19 panels. And these are the standing panels for the open call. And this means that statistically you should receive just under 100 proposals per panel. However, the distribution is not completely leveled or even, which means that there are differences. For instance, if you belong to the group 1, which is in mathematics, or group 12 in ecology, you should expect more proposals, maybe up to 150, but you will also be more reviewers in those panels. So that sort of reflects as well the number of proposals in total. So let's focus on what you're going to do now. You see here sort of an arrow in 5 steps. And these are the 5 sort of fundamental steps of our review process. And we are right now in the green part, the review, and you are about to embark on your individual review, where you're going to, as I mentioned before, mark and rank all your proposals. And that will be input for sifting. So if we look at what is going to happen now until your panel meeting, is that you have your individual review and you make your marking and ranking, and that is later on used in a pre-meeting, a sifting meeting, a few weeks before the panel meeting, where the proposals that are of lowest quality are screened out, simply because we want you to have as much time as possible to discuss the proposals that have a chance of funding at the very panel meetings. I'm not going to say so much about the sifting or the panel meeting itself now, because you will get more information further on. We will focus on this review part. So let's do that. If you look in Prisma, you will see that there is a review handbook. And this is a very important reference material for you. There you will find in these 5 steps, step-by-step information that is relevant in that particular step. There will also be a checklist at the very end, what we expect you to do during each stage here. And most likely you have been involved in peer review in other organizations, in other countries and so on, and you're quite familiar with it. And if you look around the world, peer review is used as the main tool for selecting proposals of high quality. And the fundamental steps are the same in all countries and all organizations. However, in the very execution, it is done very, very differently in different countries. So when you hear peer review, you might refer back to your own experience, which might differ from what we expect from you here when you're a reviewer at the Swedish Research Council. So peer review comes in many different flavors. Therefore, please read the handbook. It is good for you and it's good for us, and it might prevent problems further on, because you need to sort of accept the flavor of the peer review that we use at the Swedish Research Council. So a very strong urge to you is please read the handbook. You don't need to memorize it, but read it through, make sure what we expect from you, and use it as a reference material whenever you are in doubt. So let me go to the take-home messages, which I really want you to have in the back of your mind when you do your individual review, because that is important for the further on process. So let's start with the marking and ranking. Here, when it comes to the overall mark, we use a 7-grade scale, going from poor to outstanding. And you might notice that at the very top, from 7 to 4, the intervals or increments are quite small. And that is because we have quite a number of really, really good proposals that are submitted to the Swedish Research Council. And you need to have a small increment in order to be able to actually distinguish between them. So this might look different in other organizations, but slightly similar. But keep that in mind. The increment is rather small, between 4 and 7, but it is important. If you look at the marking here, there are 4 sub-criteria, and these exist in all calls from the Swedish Research Council. And then other calls can have more criteria added onto it. But here we have 4. Scientific quality, novelty, scientific merits, and feasibility. The first 3 ones are on a 7-grade scale, just like the overall grade, but feasibility is on a 3-grade scale. Please keep in mind that there is no algorithm into which you can put your marks here and reach the overall grade. It is your experience, knowledge, and competence that will help you to formulate what the overall grade is. And that is good to keep in mind with you. You see a curve at the right-hand part of this slide, and that shows the normal distribution over the 7 overall grades from 1 to 7, and the percentages with respect to all the proposals. A few things to note here. First of all, grade 7 is used with strong selection. There are very few, typically 2 to 3% in total. So one year, one panel could actually have no grade 7 proposals. It is used with care. If you go to grade 6, maybe 10 to 15% of the proposals are there. And then you come to the bulk with 30 or 30+% in the grade 5 and 4. And now you realize why a small increment is quite important in your usage here. And you also realize that in these open calls, we typically have success rates of around 20% or just above. Well, your major challenge will be in the Mark 5 proposals, to select the best Mark 5 proposals that will have a chance of funding. So that is good for you to have in the back of your mind. And then you might wonder, well, how do people or reviewers use these marks? And here's an example from a panel where you have 11 reviewers from top to bottom, and you can see how they have distributed their marks for the different proposals that they have obtained. I forgot to say one thing, and that is that you typically get assigned 20 to 30 proposals that you're expected to work on. And I will get back to that a bit later on as well, because you will have 2 different roles. But nevertheless, 20 to 30, and this is how reviewers typically distribute. Some of them are very narrow, around the middle. Some use the whole scale from 1 to 7. And then you have, of course, a difference in where the majority of your marks end up. And if you compare reviewer 1 at the top and reviewer 11 at the bottom, you see very clearly that the reviewer 1 at the top has center around the middle, whereas reviewer 11 has a larger spread, but also much lower marks overall. And of course, this is something which is going to be discussed when you come to the panel meeting, and you will reach some sort of consensus here. So, and this sort of reflects that you have no reference point. You judge these or review these proposals from your experience, but you're not really sure where on the scale you are. And maybe that is not so important, but the important part is the panel meeting in August, September. And also, this makes the next step, ranking, very, very important, because there you are forced to actually value the proposals against each other and put them in row. So let's say you have 20 proposals. Well, you have to decide which is number 7, number 9, and so on the way. And this is very important information to have. So one take-home message here is don't forget to pay attention to the ranking, because that's important information for the panel meetings later on. Okay, the eternal question about bibliometrics. It is there, readily available for everybody. There is some bibliometric information in the CV and publication list that we demand in, and that is part of the proposals that you are going to review. And a few words about bibliometrics. We are looking upon bibliometrics with a very restrictive eye, in a sense, because it must not dominate the review you do. It has a story to tell, and if you're an expert in an area, you can value what these numbers tell you. But the important thing is actually the scientific ideas in the proposal. And to me, I've reviewed thousands of proposals through the years. There's not such a strong distinction between merits, whether you measure it in number of publications or citations or whatever, and the research plan. I look much more into the quality of the scientific questions that is asked by the proposer, the applicant, because that tells more about the real quality of the scientist than the numbers you extract from bibliometrics. So we are very restrictive in using bibliometrics. It must never dominate your review, and we expect you to look beyond. So that is another take-home message for you when you work on your individual reviews here. So let's have a look at gender equality and unconscious bias. Because unconscious bias, it comes out in different ways. And one very simple way to monitor it is by looking at the success rates of applications from men and women. And here you see the outcome in terms of success rates for men and women over the last couple of years. And this was recognized as a problem of unconscious bias and sort of just before 2010. And since 2008, we've had gender observers in some of our panels to give feedback. And that has affected how we do peer review and also how the meetings are performed. So it is integrated in the whole peer review system now. And as you can see, within statistical deviations, it has become much better. Last year, you saw a slight increase in the number or the success rates for applications from women. However, you need to keep in mind that there are still rather few women applying. So a single person might change this number 20% quite significantly. But nevertheless, this is something to keep in mind. But you also need to keep in mind that there is more behind the numbers than you might see. It might look okay. But if we look, for instance, at how the marks have been distributed between applications from men and women in the different grant types that we are applying, you notice on this curve that you have one that deviates significantly. And that concerns starting grants from women. It is systematically higher in Mark 6 and Mark 4 and lower in Mark 5 if you compare to starting grants from men. We don't know why, but it tells you there is more behind the numbers of success rate than you might expect. And this is also something for you to keep in mind. We believe that here you have a clear case of unconscious bias that comes in. And the important thing for you to realize here is that this takes part at the very moment where you are now, at the individual review. And your main tool to handle this, because it is there, you cannot free yourself from society as a whole just because you become a reviewer. So this is there, and your main tool to handle it is awareness. And this is part of the reason why we have this webinar. So again, you can bring this with you. And what we expect from you when you do your review, after you made the marks, your ranking, have a look at the gender distribution and ask yourself, why does it look like it does? If you see biases of this type, then it might be good to you to think again. And that, I think, is a very good tool to go ahead. Well, of course, unconscious bias is not only about gender. It could be age or ethnicity or other aspects as well. So it's something for you to have a look at. But gender is so much more obvious. Also, I do encourage you to have a look at two small sort of YouTube or videos here. One from the Royal Society, more generally on unconscious bias, and one from ERC, which is maybe slightly different because it's more about the recruitment process rather than reviewing grants. But I think watching these, you will recognize quite a lot of phenomena. And again, this is good for you to have in the back of your mind when you approach your review. I also want to say something about informal information, because it is quite important that when you make your review, it is on the proposal you have on your table or your laptop. Avoid informal information. One reason is it is a known red flag for unconscious bias, but also because it's arbitrary. You might know something about one of the applicants, where the same circumstances might apply to another one, but you don't know about it. So you give special treatment to one proposal just by chance. And this is not fair. And for the credibility of the process, it is very important that we have a fair process. And that's why informal information is something that you should avoid. However, there is one exception, and that is if you know of unethical research behavior of a researcher that has submitted a proposal, and it is possible to verify by publicly available information, then it's your duty to bring this up to the chair and to the VR staff. So this is one exception. But of course, there's a thin line between slander and real unethical behavior, and you should never cross that one. So please keep this in mind. Conflict of interest is very central. It is there. There are quite a number of instructions. I'm not going to repeat what is on this slide. I'm going to say just one thing at the very bottom here. It might be that you at the very late stage realize, oh, I actually have a conflict of interest with respect to this particular proposal, but you overlooked it. Then please approach the chair or VR staff, and it will be handled. It happens every year. We know how to handle that. It's not dramatic, but it is important that you do report conflicts of interest, because it goes back to the credibility of the process as a whole. In rare cases, there are compulsory information missing in a proposal. Could be various reasons for that. It is not that common, but it might exist. And going back to the two previous slides about informal information and conflict of interest, is that we want to avoid direct contact between you as a reviewer and the applicants. So if you need information that you had expected and that are compulsory, go through your VR staff to retrieve it. And please don't do it the day before the meeting. Have some advance time, because then there's a bigger chance that you will get that information. And there is a deadline here, about 2 weeks. And regarding deadlines, I will soon get back to that as well. I'm not going to say very much about this, but there will be, in between your individual review and the panel meeting in August, September, there will be the sifting meeting where the chair and vice chair are using your ranking to select the ones, a suggestion for the ones that should be sifted. This is not a definite list, and it can always be discussed at the panel meeting. However, your ranking is very important here for that particular reason, and it is applied to all grant types that you are going to review this year. So let me say a few words about the roles and responsibilities, and focusing on the panel and the panel meeting. And of course you have different roles. The chair and vice chair, they will lead the discussions and make sure that we follow all regulations. And to their help, they will have VR staff, and they will also have an observer from the Scientific Council of Natural and Engineering Sciences. The observer is there for a double reason. First of all, you might have difficult cases that are not following the norm, and you need somebody to discuss with. Then you have the observer that can interpret the intentions of the Scientific Council. And also they can get information back to the Council if there are steps in the process that needs to be handled later on. But you have a very important role as a rapporteur and reviewer, because you will be assigned these 20 to 30 or so proposals, and you will see that for some of them you have been assigned as reviewer and some of them as rapporteur. It's basically the same thing, but you have more responsibilities as a rapporteur. You're expected to do the same type of review. So the reviewer will, mark and rank, very important. But then also you have the possibility in the form to write comments that you think should be brought up during the discussion, or you could write parts of a review and so on. That helps the process. That is input to the panel meeting. As rapporteur, you will do essentially the same thing. However, you are expected to write the first draft of the statement. So it is a more complete justification for the marks that you offer. But it doesn't end with that. You have more responsibilities. At the panel meeting, you are expected to present the proposal, bring out its strengths and weaknesses, and initiate the discussion with the other reviewers and the panel as a whole. But then you're also expected to make notes so that you can formulate a draft for the final statement after the panel meeting. So you do have extra responsibilities when you are a rapporteur. So please don't forget this in the work. So I'm approaching the end here, having given you a couple of things to think about. But when it comes to the statements, I just want to emphasize that please give it time. Give it time to make good statements. Because we all know that have been involved in peer review, that scientific evaluation discussions can be of really high quality, but there is a pedagogical challenge to bring that into a well-formulated statement. And the statement is the only thing that the applicant will see. So if you write a sloppy statement, they will think that the process has been sloppy. The discussions have been unqualified and so on. So this is the face that we show to all the applicants. And therefore, I want to emphasize that please give it sufficient time to formulate a written statement, because it is really central for the review process as a whole. So what happens next? Well, you will have or have been allocated as reviewer or rapporteur for some of the proposals, and you're about to embark on your individual review. The few things I brought up about marking, ranking, bibliometry, when it comes to gender equality and unconscious bias, when it comes to informal information and conflict of interest. Please keep that in the back of your mind, because that is really, really important. And the result of your individual review will, as I mentioned before, be an input to the sifting meeting, even more so to the panel meetings in Stockholm in August and September. So this is my very short webinar with a few key points for you to keep in mind. And I thank you for having participated, and I do hope you will get an interesting time with reviewing these proposals. Some of them will make you irritated, but some of them will make you happy, because it's really good science being described there. And it's those sort of golden eggs that really makes reviewing quite interesting. And by that, I end off. Thank you again. And I will be here a couple more minutes to answer questions if you have any. We'll see if there are any emails.
Yes, we have a question.
Right.
It's about judgment of research quality. It says, it's clear how to evaluate scientific quality of conducted research, but much less clear how to judge the quality of proposed research. How do one actually judge the quality of the proposed research question?
Right. So that's a very, very good question, because it makes it possible for me to guide you to some guiding questions. If you look at the information you get, you will have a couple of guiding questions for each sub-criterion to review. And that will give you some indication of how we interpret, let's say, scientific quality in the research plan. And of course, one of the reasons why it is important to have experts like you in specific areas is that you know the research in that area. You know where the research front is. You know what type of research will actually bring this front forward and give us more knowledge, or if it's sort of boring research that is already within the area that is well known. That is why you are so important in the peer review process. And that is part of what we expect you to be able to define. Where is the frontier of knowledge, and how does this particular proposal relate to bringing this front forward? So it is one specific answer when it comes to the guiding questions, and a more fluffy response when it comes to the actual question. How do I evaluate? But if I know an area, it's pretty clear for me when a proposal really brings forward or brings interesting science. And that's part of being an expert in your field. I'm a bit silent here, but when you attend pedagogic courses, you're always said to, well, you should wait 30 seconds before you close the meeting if there are no more questions. But please keep in mind that you can use this email address also if you sort of think about something when you read the review handbook, which I hope you will, or when you actually start your review. Please contact the Vera staff and you will get good guidance in your individual review. It is a very important step of the process here. Sometimes you might get emails that is more a statement than a question. So they are fighting with extracting the question, I think.
Yes, we have a comment from the chat at YouTube. I'm unsure about the signals sent by the feasibility measure. In particular, I can see very uninteresting proposals that are entirely feasible, to the point of being a master's project and vice versa.
Yes.
And a follow-up now. I can imagine very strong high-risk proposals. Is there a distribution of feasibility scores available for both accepted and rejected proposals?
Well, I can say as a general question, this is a question that pops up all the time. You know, you have this 3-grade scale, 1, 2, 3. 3 is really feasible, 1 is, well, not so good. And then you have the number 2. Why is the number 2 there? Well, exactly because you have this whole distribution. You might have a scientifically uninteresting project, but it's highly feasible because everything is known. Of course, it will get a 3, but then you have a possibility to actually make a comment there, saying, "Hey, this is uninteresting science." Maybe you shouldn't write that because it's not so nice. But you can write it in a nicer way than I expect. And it's very feasible. Yeah, and then you might have these really interesting suggestions for a scientific project, and you think, oh yeah, if they succeed, it might really be cool, but I'm not really sure if they can do it. And you put a 2, but a 2 might not be bad if you motivate why you put a 2. That's why there is a box for you to fill in, saying, hey, this is super interesting. I'm not so sure that this is going to be possible to perform, but it's worth giving them the chance or something like that. So that's the reason why we had this 3 grade. And that's also the type of review that you are expected to do, because you have the knowledge, what is possible to do and not. So you have the full grade in 2 dimensions, we could say, or the full spectrum in 2 dimensions.
How is the asked information on expertise employed? Will it happen that we will receive proposal where our expertise is low?
Yes. And you're expected to alongside your reporting conflict of interest, to give a mark on your competence level. And a few things to say about this. First of all, please don't mix up competence level with confidence level. Yeah, some people will put top on all, but we don't know all fields that well. And in some panels, this is not really an issue because they're quite homogeneous. It's the same field all over. And either you know a field or you don't know it so well. And you put very clearly there. And the mark from 1 to 3, low, medium or high. And of course in other panels, they are much more heterogeneous and consist of different sub-areas. And it is very likely that the majority of proposals that you will be asked to review, you have a high competence level. But there will be proposals that you have been allocated where you need to set a low. And to be quite honest, but you still can evaluate or review a few things, because in some parts of the proposal you don't need to be an expert in that particular field. Let's say how well is the project structured? Are all information there? Is it good craftsmanship and so on? You might not have the possibility to fully judge the frontier of knowledge in that particular field, but you can review quite a number of parts. And that's why we have these three levels, low, middle and high, because partly it is a tool for the chair and vice chair when they allocate proposals, but it also is an input to the discussion at the panel meeting. Because if you're really competent in an area, of course, your opinion has some weight. If you have marked a low competence level, of course, that is information that is existing in the discussion as well. So it plays a role, both, well, for you in reflecting, but also for the panel chair and vice chair, and in the discussions at the meeting.
Next question. How are the different criteria weighted?
As I mentioned, you have these 4 sub-criteria. There is no algorithm to tell you how to weight them together. The 2 ones, and that's very good that I got this question, because it's something I forgot to say on that particular slide. Scientific quality and scientific merits are the 2 ones that we give the highest weight, but it's not expressed in numbers. But these are the 2 most important when you're going to formulate the overall mark. Of course, feasibility comes in, and we discussed this just before. It has a role to play. Sometimes it is a positive thing, and sometimes it's a negative thing. But then you also have the novelty aspect, which we're always fighting with. Some people think that is an integral part of scientific quality, and it is. But it has been broken out as an individual sub-criterion for you to review, simply because the Swedish Research Council want to emphasize the importance of novelty, just along the ideas of bringing the frontier of knowledge forward. But going back, scientific quality of the proposal and the scientific merits are the 2 that we put the largest weight to.
Yeah, we got a question about the final statements. What is the expected length of the final statements?
We have no such, but normally when you write a final statement, there are a couple of things that should be there. We hope you to write a clear but not too long statement. But you can't put numbers in terms of number of words and so on. But it should contain a short description of the project, just the overall purpose and so on. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? And some sort of conclusion. And alongside that, I need to emphasize a few things when you write the statements. Is one, don't express it as I think or we think. Keep it more general in your formulation. Avoid numbers. Because if you write, for instance, oh, this person has published 54 papers in 8 years or whatever, and it turns out to be wrong, I'm going to get a complaint afterwards. So please avoid numbers. Yeah, you could phrase it in other ways. Is a good production over the last couple of years or something like that, more general. But then, when it comes to giving strengths, that is normally not so difficult. But when it comes to giving weaknesses, that is something, unfortunately, we often miss. And also there's another aspect that please keep in mind, don't be rude. And this is, of course, a challenge, a pedagogical challenge, to be clear but not insulting. So, but these parts should be there. Overall description of the main purpose, strengths, weakness, and then some sort of conclusion. That is normally a good format of a statement. And don't make them too long and in more general formulation.
I would also like to just comment from the administration that the final statements examples will be available in conjunction with the panel meeting. Another question we got is if I get a proposal for review but do not feel that my competence is sufficient, is it possible to reject reviewing some of the assigned proposals?
Normally, we do expect you for a couple of proposals to have to step outside your comfort zone. That is the way it is. If we are too narrow in the peer review in panels, we would have infinitely big panels. So we are restricted to you, a certain number, maybe 10 to 15 people in the review panels, and do expect that you have to step outside your comfort zone. You can, of course, have a discussion with your chair and vice chair if it's for specific reasons. But as a general rule, think twice or three times before doing that, because you are expected to be a bit uncomfortable in a few of the proposals. That's part of being in a panel wherever you're serving.
To know if and how assessments from the different panels will be compared after the ranking within one panel. Do proposals in different panels compete for the same money, or is it one lump of money allocated to each panel? This question obviously extends to the issue of reviewer calibration, extended to panel calibration.
Yeah. So the answer is sort of yes and no. The way the total budget for natural and engineering science is handled, with respect to the budgets for the individual panels, the 19 that you saw on one of the slides early on, is that the Scientific Council allocates a specific budget to all these panels. So when a panel starts the meeting, they will know their budget and can make a rough estimate where this magical line between funding and not funding will come out. That was with one reservation, that's why I said a no as well, is that the Scientific Council keeps about 10% of the total budget for a year for being able to handle biases if they appear, and they will handle that after the final meeting of the panels this autumn. So there might be, let's say, one or two, or maybe no, extra grants approved after you've done your work in your panel. So the majority of the budget is allocated by the Scientific Council. You will know what it is. There could be a bonus of one or two, or maybe zero proposals granted later on by the Scientific Council itself. And that is one of the reasons why you, in the panels, you're expected to make a reserve list of 10 proposals, both starting grants and project grants intermixed. And it's very important here to realize that the reason I said that often you might get one or two more grants on your list taken from your reserve list, but it might also be zero, is that you should not be strategical or tactical in setting up this reserve list. You should do it from scientific quality alone, because you don't know if any of these will be granted later on by the Scientific Council. So main message is the majority of budget is allocated by Scientific Council to the panels, so you know what you're going to work with when you come to the meetings this autumn.
How do we evaluate an outstanding proposal which reveals ethical issues?
I guess you mean that you have an outstanding scientific proposal, but there are concerns about unethical researcher behavior. Okay, then it's a very clear instruction to you here, is that you make a as clear scientific evaluation alone. Your responsibility is to VR staff and to me actually highlight that there might be unethical scientific behavior behind it, and then VR will take care of any legal aspects later on. And I realize this is a real challenge. Of course, if you know about, and it's well known, about unethical behavior, it might, of course, affect your scientific evaluation. But you are asked to make a fair scientific evaluation alone, highlight the problems, and VR, will handle that sort of legal problem later on in the process. Your work is science. Our work will be to take care of the legal aspects. Okay, no more questions at the moment. Please remember you can ask questions later on and you will get written answers back. Again, thank you very much for participating, and thank you very much for the questions, because they allowed me to pinpoint a few extra points that is important for you to have with you. So I do hope you will get some interesting work during the summer, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all here in Stockholm in August, September. Cheerio.